Welcome. It's been an exciting week. UFO hearings. We had the second UFO hearings in 50 years, and we had Sean Kirkpatrick, and he gave a lot of information. I was quite surprised. I'm still going through the actual hearings. I think most of the UFO community is going back through them. So that's what we're going to do is go back through these hearings. I got a call from Martin Willis. So he's one of my early mentors. I went on his show at the very beginning. He hosts a UFO podcast live now. He's been hosting it for 12 years, a weekly live show into UFO. So I was excited to kind of get his impression of it. So we'll go through the hearings. There are some pretty interesting points out of the UFO hearings. So thanks for being here. And with that, let's bring on our guest, Martin Willis. Welcome, Martin.
Hey, how you doing, Chris?
Yeah,
Always a pleasure to see you.
We were asking about the hearings. You were live streaming them as well, or wanted to show the hearings out to your audience?
Right. And I think it's worth noting that when I first reached out to you, you were a little bit hesitant about being on a show that focuses on UFOs.
I was actually.
Why you've come
I remember thinking, am I going to go on the show? And initially I wasn't. And then I realized it was just fear. But it was fear. Why am I not going on this? Someone's asking me to go on a podcast. Why wouldn't I go? And I realized it's just fear of hurting my supposed credibility or something, some ego issue.
Yeah. Well, you've come a long way since that time. You've done really well. You've kind of moved the needle along here, and I appreciate everything you've done.
No, I appreciate your help as well. So let's get to the hearings. Let's see.
You bet.
Here we go. Hopefully this will work. And it did not. Oh, it is. So it was quite late. I think 34 minutes.
Hearing will come to order. I'd first like to thank our witness, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, for...
Okay, they zoom out so quickly. I just wanted to pause it here to look at the room. I thought it was interesting. Like,
oh yeah,
how many people are in here? This guy's he has his mask on over here, the recorder or something. There's a few people in the audience. I know there was at least one YouTuber said he was going to try and go to this hearing. I don't know if they'll let him in. It doesn't look like there's so many people here. I wonder what this guy's looking at. You can almost see it right here if he knows he's on TV. So this is Kirkpatrick here at the end of this sort of longish table. And then we have Kirsten Gillibrand here. And this is Ernst, right? You mentioned Ernst.
Joni Ernst, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go.
For testifying here and in today's earlier closed session, and for his long and distinguished career, both in the intelligence community and in the Department of Defense. Dr. Kirkpatrick is the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or Aero. Congress established this office in law to get to the bottom of the very serious problem of unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or UAP. Dr. Kirkpatrick has a very difficult mission. While we have made progress, there remains a stigma attached to these phenomenon. There is a vast and complex citizen engagement, and there's also very challenging scientific and technical hurdles. So we appreciate the willingness of Dr. Kirkpatrick to lean in on this issue and the work that he has accomplished thus far. And we look forward to both his opening statement and his presentation of examples of the work Aero has done. In late 2017, media reports surfaced about activity set in motion by the late long-serving Majority Leader, Senator Harry Reid, more than a decade ago. We learned that there was strong evidence of advanced technology reflected in the features and performance characteristics of many objects observed by our highly trained service members operating top-of-the-line military equipment. We learned that for the past 8 years, military pilots frequently encountered unknown objects in controlled airspace off both the east and west coasts across the continental United States in test and training areas and ranges. We don't know where they come from, who made them, or how they operate. As former Deputy Secretary of Defense David Norquist observed, had any of these objects had the label made in China, there would be an uproar in the government and media.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. So Kirsten Gillibrand, what do you think of her, Martin? What is your impression of Kirsten?
Well, I actually appreciate the fact that she's been really pushing this. I mean, it seems like this hearing was in part initiated because of her pushing it.
Seems like she's written the initial amendment to actually form Aero, from what I understand. So she made the Aero office, stood up from the UAP task force. She seems pretty involved in this whole operation. That was one of the main points I learned from this hearing, is that, Kirsten Gillibrand is definitely involved, and it seems like she's on top of this. And she has some pointy questions to Kirkpatrick
Yeah.
later.
And I'm not sure if part of it is with constituents or if it's all like what she has learned on the inside where she thinks this needs to be really, in front and center and open to the public eventually.
Yeah, right there she mentioned pilots. She mentions the pilots. So I think Ryan Graves and those other pilots on the East Coast, and David Fravor and those guys as well. So she must have been at those hearings, I'm assuming.
Mhm. Yeah, right.
There'd be no stone unturned and no effort spared to find out what we were dealing with. We can look at the recent incursion of the unidentified PRC high altitude balloon as an example. But because of the UFO stigma, the response has been irresponsibly anemic and slow. Congress established Aero. We made it clear that we expect vigorous action. We added very substantial initial funding for the office, but despite our best efforts, the president's budget for fiscal years 23 and 24 requested only enough funding to defray the operating expenses of Aero. It included almost no funds to sustain the critical research and development necessary to support a serious investigation. It took a letter to Secretary Austin from Senator Rubio and me and 14 other senators to get the office temporary relief for the current fiscal year. In this hearing, I intend to probe a series of specific issues. In the recent incidents where multiple objects were shot down over North America, it seemed that Pentagon leadership did not turn to Aero office to play a leading role in advising the combatant commander. We need to know whether this will continue. We need to know whether the leadership in DoD will bring Aero into the decision-making process in a visible way. And we need to know what role Aero will play in interagency coordination after the NSC working group disbands. In the fiscal year 2023 National Defense and Intelligence Authorization Acts, Congress established a direct reporting chain from the Aero Director to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The role of the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security is limited to providing administrative support. We need to know how this direction is being implemented.
Okay, so a lot of stuff there. I think she just explained it. Is they are pissed that the Pentagon did not fund Aero, right? Despite
Right.
their best efforts, she said. So despite our best efforts to create this office and to get it funded and to get it manned with the right people, they're not doing it. She blamed it square on the stigma. So she said, really, it's based on the stigma. We've had an anemic response. So I think this is right here. She just said it. Congress is not happy with how Aero's gone. I mean, look, the first report, it was supposed to be due October 31st, and we got it in January, basically January 15th, I think. So it sounds like she's.
And I think the only reason the funding became available is because of the term that this could be foreign adversaries. Otherwise, who knows, if it would have been funded at all.
UAP are frequently observed flying in extremely high or very low speeds and come in various sizes and shapes. During the recent shootdowns over North America, DoD disclosed that filters on radar systems were adjusted to allow for detection and tracking of diverse sets of objects for the first time. While opening the aperture can overload the real-time analytic process, we cannot keep turning a blind eye to surveillance data that is critical to detecting and tracking UAP. We need to know whether Dr. Kirkpatrick can achieve the necessary control over sensor filters and the storage and access to raw surveillance data to find UAP anomalies.
That's quite interesting. So basically, if you opened up your filters too much, then you're going to get so much clutter that it's going to overwhelm all of our systems. If you remember back, Martin, like the CIA, wasn't that the original reason that they invented the stigma, was because the Russians could use it to drive our population into like a panic, basically overwhelm our systems, overwhelm our defense systems.
Right. Yeah. And, she's also mentioning, and it comes up quite a bit in this about the shoot downs and the 4 anomalous objects. And just for your listeners, I mean, I know that you know this, but I was right under the Chinese balloon when it got shot. And it was just,
You
I
had a
didn't even
video on
know.
your phone, which is almost
I
as good
do,
as the
yeah. I
one
mean,
we saw on TV.
it was crazy. I stepped out of the car and the real estate agent said, "Oh, this is a Chinese balloon." I said, "Yeah, it looks just like it." He said, "No, it is the Chinese balloon." And then the fighter jet came and kapow, I saw it all.
And right
And,
then,
snap
you
pictures.
look up and
Yeah.
saw them.
I saw it right then when it happened. I mean, the odds of that was pretty funny.
And you said it
But
was
yeah.
easy to see, right? You could really just clearly see.
Oh
it from
yeah,
the ground.
it was a crystal clear day, and you could see it was very tiny though, but you could see the object, and then you saw the puff of smoke and you saw the whole thing. And I filmed it actually, the debris landing, and you could see the panels sparkling as they were falling. And yeah, it was really something.
Have you heard any update on that? Do you know any idea what's going on? Have you heard any more data?
No, no, I mean,
Yeah.
if you notice, we haven't heard anything about any of them, all of them. I know there supposedly one of them was a college project or something, but one of them has been recovered, as far as I know. They said they stopped the recovery efforts, which
They're
I
just
don't I
embarrassed
don't know.
it's like a
It's
balloon, or it's like a real UFO. Those are our
yeah,
2 options.
that's right.
Finally, one of the tasks Congress set for Aero is serving as an open door for witnesses of UAP events or participants in government activities related to UAPs to come forward securely and disclose what they know without fear of retribution for any possible violations of previously signed non disclosure agreements. Congress mandated that Aero set up a publicly discoverable and accessible process for safe disclosure. While we know that Aero has already conducted a significant number of interviews, many referred by Congress, we need to set up a public process and we need to know where that effort stands.
Okay, that was interesting too. So she asked a pretty pointy question at the end is, why isn't there a way for people to give in public witness, I guess, public testimonies? You can't go to
Right.
an Aero website anywhere and then give your UFO story or your UAP story. And that's what she's
And
talking about there.
is she meaning this only for the military? Because
That's
I
what
know
it sounds like
there's a
to me.
lot
I
of
mean,
focus on it.
that's what they were set up to form was a authorized disclosure. So that I think that was the
Mm,
agreement is why isn't the military giving any information is because there's no way to give the information and keep it secure, keep it classified, right?
mm.
So what I think Congress is saying is, okay, make a way for them to give the information and keep it classified. And in the law, they called that authorized disclosure, is what is in the NDAA 2023. So I think that authorized disclosure, that process, it hasn't been created, and that's what she's mad about. Her, at least I don't know about her, but all of us, I guess, Congress in general is not happy. They were supposed to do it, and it hasn't been done. And she's having this hearing, I guess, to see why.
Well, it almost seems like it would make sense if there was some type of vetting for like an encounter and then a one-way portal to report it, that type of thing where no one could access it, just so at that point they can look through the data, and then eventually, hopefully, they'll be transparent on this. But I have my
Well, if it's
doubts
in the
with a lot of it.
if you want to keep it in, say, secret, right? If you want to make it secret information, the military knows how to do this. We have secret nets. It's called
Yeah.
CyberNet. It's a
Oh,
secret internet, and so they could
oh,
have
that's right. Yeah, I've heard about
on
that.
there
Yeah.
that has anonymous reporting on the CyberNet. So
Hmm.
there's certainly ways it can be done. Um,
Yeah.
it just hasn't
About
been,
that.
is what it sounds like, and Gillibrand is asking why not.
Hmm.
She mentions NDAs too.
On the NDAs, just
Hmm.
one other thing. Are people like who had past encounters, like say 20 years ago, how are they ever going to be aware of this NDA release?
You
You
mean
know, I'm
how are
like
like
say
normal
so someone
citizens out there going to
no,
hear
no,
about
I'm
it?
talking about military, a military that's had an NDA or whatever the agreement is or the classification or whatever. I mean, does it cover like this is a classified encounter, you can't talk about it. But I'm just wondering if someone has like a history of some major encounter, unless they're like really following this closely, they're not going to know that it's okay now to be able to talk about it.
I agree. Yeah, I mean
So,
it's up to, I guess, the media to put out the information. And like I think you bring up a great point because I think Congress was assuming they would have, some sort of website. So when they have constituents come to them, and that's probably where it's coming from actually, is constituents that have met with these Congress people are like, look, this is real, or I was there, this is my story, I'm not lying, etc. They're receiving compelling witness accounts from their constituents. And I think they have nowhere to send them.
right.
Like she said
Yeah.
here, later in the hearings, Kirkpatrick says there was over 2 dozen witnesses. So that may be one of the
Mhm.
reasons, why for this hearing.
Yeah. Interesting, huh?
It should work. The NDAs, I mean, they seem to cover everything. So now let's go back to Kirkpatrick here. And he's reading from his statement.
Robust collaboration and peer review across a broad range of partners will promote greater objectivity and transparency in the study of UAP.
I mean, the words are good. It's his monotone delivery, like he's forced to read it or something.
I want to underscore today that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display signatures that could reasonably be described as anomalous.
Okay, so he did just say, right, a small percentage
Yeah.
of these reports. Ooh, okay. Yeah, I was just making sure I heard that right. So he does say some small percentage of these reports do have anomalous characteristics, right?
The majority of unidentified objects reported to Aero demonstrate mundane characteristics of balloons, unmanned aerial systems, clutter, natural phenomena, or other readily explainable sources. While a large number of cases in our holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases. Without sufficient data, we are unable to reach defendable conclusions that meet the high scientific standards we set for resolution. And I will not close a case that I cannot defend the conclusions of.
Okay, so basically saying there kind of sounds like the old Blue Book answer. What was your impression of Kirkpatrick, his opening statements?
Well, it sounds like he's sort of contradicting himself a little bit there, when it comes to what he considers anomalous or unidentified. Because, well, in the UFO community, we've said for many years, it's a very small percentage, some people have said, maybe 7%, some people say 10% of things that actually, no matter how much they're investigated, they cannot be resolved. So we've always agreed to that. But I mean, does it take more than one? That's the thing. If you could not explain one, that's pretty extraordinary, with all the data available. And then he makes a statement later on. We could talk about that. That is another kind of contradictive statement.
Yeah, that's the big thing because they don't mention anything about gimbal. So on the East Coast, and Gillibrand brought that up in the opening statements, right? What about the East Coast?
Mm.
And I've
Right.
heard nothing about Nimitz. I guess that's
Right.
what I want to know is, have they investigated all of the Nimitz data? Do they have all the radar data? Do they have all the tapes? The radar tapes from the Hawkeye. Have they
Yeah.
even talked to the witnesses to actually get all the data from that case? Right? You say it only takes one. Do they have the data from Nimitz, and have they looked at it? That would
Right.
be my only. If I got Kirkpatrick like in the lone room, be like, what about Nimitz?
Yeah. And the data bricks from the Hawkeye were taken off the ship within a few hours of that thing going back to the carrier. So
by
where
Aero
are they?
themselves,
And who has those? They should be able to be accessible to this team, really. Scientific
Do they
team.
have it? That's my big question.
Intelligence.
This answer is unsatisfying to those who, in good faith, assume that what they see with their eyes, with their cameras, and with their radars is incontrovertible evidence of extraordinary characteristics and performance. Yet, time and again, with sufficient scientific quality data, it is fact that UAP often, but not always, resolve into readily explainable sources.
But not all.
Humans are subject to deception and illusions, sensors to unexpected responses and malfunctions, and in some cases, intentional interference. Getting to the handful of cases that pass this level of scrutiny is the mission of Aero. That is not to say that UAP, once resolved, are no longer of national security interest, however. On the contrary, learning that a UAP isn't of exotic origin, but is instead just a quadcopter or balloon, leads to the question of who is operating that quadcopter and to what purpose. The answers to those questions will inform potential national security or law enforcement responses. Aero is a member of the department's support to the administration's Tiger Team effort to deal with stratospheric objects such as the PRC high-altitude balloon. When previously unknown objects are successfully identified, it is Aero's role to quickly and efficiently hand off such readily explainable objects to the intelligence, law enforcement, or operational safety communities for further analysis and appropriate action. In other words, Aero's mission is to turn UAP into SEP, somebody else's problem.
What did you think of his little joke?
Yeah, like you said earlier, inside joke, apparently. Yeah, to pass it off to someone else. But, I want what he said in the initial part of that. I want them to do that, to weed through and to try to find the ones that can't be explained. That's all I think anyone is really looking for is what is the evidence and to pass it off as like to say there's nothing to see here, possibly balloons or other clutter, et cetera. We want all that stuff to go away because there's enough real interesting things that are out there. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater type of thing, you know?
Yeah, they mentioned, we have 510 cases, there's 650 new cases, but we
Yeah.
just need one really good case or with
Yeah.
the proper evidence.
Yeah.
The U.S. government, the DoD and the IC in particular, has tremendous capabilities to deal with those encountered objects. In the wake of the PRC HAB event, the interagency is working to better integrate and share information to address identifiable stratospheric objects, but that is not Aero's lane. Meanwhile, for the few cases in all domains, space, air, and sea, that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics, Aero exists to help the DoD, IC, and interagency resolve those anomalous cases. In doing so, Aero is approaching these cases with the highest level of objectivity and analytic rigor. This includes physically testing and employing modeling and simulation to validate our analyses and underlying theories, then peer reviewing those results within the U.S. government, industry partners, and appropriately cleared academic institutions before reaching any conclusions.
Yeah, stop it here. He talks about his process. When they talk about the process, it was a 6-step process where they divided up into 2 teams. So they receive the reports, they do their first hack at it to determine if this is something that they can use or not. And then they actually divide it out into 2 teams. He says they have
Yes.
basically intel teams,
Scientific engineers and intelligence. And then they adjudicate any discussion when they disagree, basically, which sounds good to me. Overall.
Yeah, but I heard some questions asked on what's the peer review, who's going to peer review these classified papers. But, again, if you can keep it within the
Yeah.
same network, classified, I guess that can work. So I don't know. It's just interesting you went through their process, which is good to hear. I was happy to hear anything on it.
Right.
I should also state clearly for the record that in our research, Aero has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics. In the event sufficient scientific data were ever obtained that a UAP encountered can only be explained by extraterrestrial origin, we are committed to working with our interagency partners at NASA to appropriately inform U.S. government's leadership of its findings. For those few cases that have leaked to the public previously and subsequently commented on by the U.S. government, I encourage those who hold alternative theories or views to submit your research to credible peer-reviewed scientific journals. Aero is working very hard to do the same. That is how science works, not by blog or social media.
So I think he's talking right to us, Martin. He's talking right to us.
That's right.
So
I think it's
that would be my
interesting.
question.
Yeah.
Have you looked at Nimitz? Because if they've looked at Nimitz and they have all the evidence on it,
Yeah.
that would be pretty interesting. Because I don't know how you can explain the Nimitz without.
Yeah. He says that in particular, if of all the cases really defies physics that we know about, and we have Fravor's testimony. There's radar data on that. And, Kevin Day, I don't think we have the data on it, but what he seemed to observe at the time in the present 2004 was when that thing dropped from, I think it was 60 or 70,000 feet down to just above the ocean floor. It was something like 13,000 G or something like that. And we don't have any whatever it was, we don't have any technology that would hold together, never mind it being occupied. Like we don't have anything that would hold together with that G-force that we know of, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he just said right there, right, that they don't have any evidence that it's extraterrestrial, correct?
Yeah.
But we've seen the testimonies, right, from Fravor and Dietrich
Yeah.
and Underwood. And I mean, Fravor says he doesn't know of anything on this planet that could do it, you know?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
all the pilots that have come in contact with it, I mean, they've said at least open source, public, they don't think it's made from something around here. I mean, Fravor says that whatever it is, I'd like to fly it.
And that was
Says,
nearly 20 years ago now. And it just seems like if we had some equipment like that, you would think that the government would be communicating with whoever developed that type of equipment, and know that and explain them, and it would be explainable.
exactly.
So,
Yeah. So what he's saying there is that what I'm understanding is he's talked to them. He's reviewed all the evidence for Nimitz, and he's found that they still don't have any signs of extraterrestrial. Which I mean, literally, Fravor says I think it was extra. I don't think it was made here. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't want to misquote him on that, but that was pretty sure
yeah,
that's
he
what he
said
says.
something, yeah, paraphrasing something like that.
That would be my question to Kirkpatrick. Having talked to those pilots, because they say it's
Yeah.
not from around here. Okay, so so he goes through that intro and then he rolls into the actual cases and gives some actual examples. I thought this was quite interesting.
We know that there is tremendous public interest in UAP and a desire for answers from Aero. By its very nature, the UAP challenge has for decades lent itself to mystery, sensationalism, and even conspiracy. For that reason, Aero remains committed to transparency, accountability, and to sharing as much with the American public as we can, consistent with our obligation to protect not only intelligence sources and methods, but U.S. and allied capabilities. However, Aero's work will take time if we are committed to do it right. It means adhering to the scientific method and the highest standards of research integrity. It means being methodical and scrupulous. It means withholding judgment in favor of evidence. It means following the data where it leads, wherever it leads. It means establishing scientific peer-reviewed theoretical underpinnings of observed data. And Aero is committed to all of those standards. I'm proud of Aero's progress over the last 9 months. Much remains to be done, but the hard work is underway. Thank you for your continued support. And before we turn to questions, I want to walk you through some of our analytical trends and a couple of cases that we've prepared.
I love this part.
So one of the things that Aero does is high integrity analysis, as I've said. This chart represents the trend analysis of all the cases in Aero's holdings, right, to date. What you'll see on the left is a histogram of all of our reported sightings as a function of altitude.
That's his mouse.
So most of our sightings occur in the 15 to 25,000 foot range. And that is ultimately because that's where a lot of our aircraft are. On the far right upper corner, you'll see a breakout of the morphologies of all of the UAP that are reported. Over half, about 52% of what's been reported to us are round orb spheres.
That's just insane to me, right? So let's just look at this chart real quick. So down the bottom, I'll cover this up here So on the left side here, you have the altitudes of these reports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can just kind of look at the numbers, like 0%, but was there not 0.3%? So can give you an idea for how many numbers they have, but supposedly 650. And then he says here, right, that again, we have no record of anything. We have no evidence of anything extraterrestrial. But then he goes through this chart here. And this chart kind of blows my mind, right? Because he says here, okay, over half of what we're seeing is orb round spheres. That's in a US hearing, essentially. He says orb round spheres. And then if I zoom in here, you can see these other shapes. That says vector is 0%. Tic Tac is 1%. Okay, so they do have a Tic Tac on there. Polygon 1%. Square is 1%. Rectangle 1%. Triangle's 2%. Disc is 2%. Cylinder 2%. Oval 3%. And lights are 5%. So that's pretty interesting right there.
Well, I'm surprised the lights aren't more because that's the most commonly reported, which is, and usually lights can be explained away anyway. So, I mean, these probably are more the extraordinary cases. But yeah, the sphere, what do we know that can travel? If it's a sphere, how can it be traveling around and doing all these things, especially at the
Yeah,
altitudes they're talking
well, they
about?
do. We do send off weather balloons. I think every day, weather stations send off weather balloons.
Oh,
Could
okay. So
theoretically have thousands of these things. I mean, thousands of these things are flying around every day,
I got it. I got what you're saying.
and
Yeah.
so that's why the balloon is it's your main culprit, right? For Mosul orb, it's going to be almost impossible to prove it's not a balloon.
Okay.
It's
So this is
floating.
the reported, not saying that the things that they've gone through.
This is just all reported here. Well, you were just saying
Yeah.
what could be a round orb that doesn't have any sort of thermal exhaust, right? So we go through here. Round atypical orientations or morphology. Size is 1 to 4 meters. So 4 meters, pretty interesting.
Like 16 feet or
Color,
something.
white, silver, translucent. And again, balloons can fit into this. Weather balloons can get that big. Altitude 10 to 30,000 feet is what it says under there. Stationary to Mach
Mhm.
2. So this is the number. This is what blew my mind. I watched his initial statement, and I said, "Oh, this isn't going to be good." And then he goes, "Okay, next slide. Let's show a few of our examples." And then he just goes to this slide. I was like, "Man, that's ridiculous." Balloon, right? Most of them are round, so that you could say that's a balloon. It's round, typical. Okay, yeah, it could be 1 to 4 meters. Okay, white. Okay, maybe it could be see-through if it's some sort of see-through plastic. Altitude max up. No thermal exhaust. Okay, radio. They can put some radios on there. They can. Yeah, radar. If you're hitting them, that makes sense. I don't see why thermal would be showing up. Okay, so all of these can be kind of explained away with some sort of hobby balloon with a radio transmitter on it, right? But not
Yeah.
this
But
one.
the
Not where it's going
Mach
Mach
2,
2. So
like,
that is definitely breakthrough physics of some kind, right? Because how are you going Mach 2 with no exhaust?
yeah,
Or how are you going
it's,
Mach 2 and you're not putting out shockwaves, right? And I think that was Avi Loeb's whole idea about why the Kiev captures couldn't be correct.
and stationary is another thing. Of course, a balloon
Yeah,
can,
you're right.
you're up there with the winds, you're going to be moving around if you're a balloon, really.
That's
So,
a great point. Yeah, stationary is
mm,
just as weird in high winds. If you look at any balloon, especially the larger it gets, the more uncontrollable it is. The Chinese spy balloon, it was up there pretty high. It was up over 60,000 feet. How do you control something that big, at that altitude? And you're not keeping it stationary. In order to have a drone stationary in 150 knot winds, that drone has to be able to go 150 knots, has to be able to fly that fast into the wind. So, yeah, quite interesting. This is the highlight for the whole hearing for me, right here. That's stationary to Mach 2. This slide. So let's see what else he says on this.
The rest of those break out into all kinds of different other shapes. The gray box is essentially there's no data on what its shape is. Either it wasn't reported or the sensor did not collect it. The bottom map is a heat map of all reporting areas across the globe that we have available to us. What you'll notice is that there is a heavy, what we call collection bias, both in altitude and in geographic location. That's where all of our sensors exist. That's where our training ranges are. That's where our operational ranges are. That's where all of our platforms are. In the middle, what we have done is reduce the most typically reported UAP characteristics to these fields, mostly round, mostly 1 to 4 meters, white, silver, translucent, metallic, 10,000 to 30,000 feet with apparent velocities from stationary to Mach 2. No thermal exhausts usually detected. We get intermittent radar returns. We get intermittent radio returns, and we get intermittent thermal signatures. That's what we're looking for and trying to understand what that is. Next slide.
I love that. Next slide. I love this slide. So that was the highlight for me. Again, I was happy to see also the Mosul orb as well as the other. I'll spend more time actually analyzing that video later. But here for the hotspots, I was kind of curious to see this hotspot here, and what I noticed is it was none of the kind of Air Force or the Air Force training areas. We fly all along in here. These weren't noted. Up here, huge Air Force presence. So in Europe, so it's almost like the Air Force did not contribute. Is my guess on this, just based on.
I think more Navy.
I think you have. It looks like the Navy. So I believe my guess is they're only getting reporting from the Navy, based on this. Because.
And why do you think that is? I mean,
Air Force training areas. This should be covered for sure. If these are your main sensor areas. This lack of data here, it means you're not getting reporting. So, yeah, I would say why aren't you getting reporting here? My guess is the Air Force would be my guess.
And why do you think the Air Force wouldn't be participating?
I don't know. I think it's just from Blue Book in the past. It's suspicious, right? It really does look suspicious. I don't know why the Air Force wouldn't participate.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah. What do you think? What is your impression of the Air Force in this whole situation?
That's been a puzzle since the beginning of all of this. Okay, the Navy pilots are, there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of sightings, but it seems like the Air Force has stepped back through this whole thing. Really, I mean, that's just, watching it from the outside. Maybe that's not so, but it really does seem like they should be first and foremost, and yet they're not. So
yeah, and I know Chris Mellon, he's complained about them in several of his posts, saying that it's not even that they're not helping, that they seem as in they're getting in the way. They're actually part of the problem even. So, and that's what I noted here on the hotspots. I was like, where are the places I flew? I don't see, none of Europe. That's quite suspicious to me. So I think there's definitely reporting issues. But if you look at this chart, I got to bring it up again. I mean, that's just amazing, right? So from 96 to 2023, I mean, here's your data. That's what we're looking for. If they can solve this problem, be quite interesting. Okay. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. We are going to actually move it over to Martin's podcast as well for the second half of this hearings review. So thank you for being here. Please check out Martin's channel. Can you just say it, Martin, please?
Yeah, well, the channel is called Podcast UFO Live Shows, and we're going to link each other in the show notes, or the show text, I should say, and possibly pin on a post so you're easily able to go back through. And then at the end screens also, we'll try to do all that so we can kind of connect with each other here.
Everyone, smash that like button. If you did like this show, subscribe to get future content. Check out Martin's channel as well. And then if you want to support the channel, go to patreon.com/Chris Lato. Thanks again for being here. Have a great weekend. Peace.